Can you assess any work of art objectively? My personal opinion is no, because to do that you would need to disregard every aspect of it that isn't measurable according to some sort of agreed upon system. You do that with art, you regress to Understanding Poetry by Dr. J. Evans Pritchard, PhD. However, if you can assess a work of art objectively, then Lunopolis is the single greatest found footage movie ever made. Personally, I don't see much difference between science fiction and fantasy these days, with most movies produced being sheer escapism. Not that there's anything wrong with that, I love fun as much as the next guy, but when a film comes along that doesn't feel like a video game and still manages to hold my attention to the end, it just makes me glee that little bit more. And wow, can I nerd out about the story this movie takes us on. It begins with news excerpts about a supposed supernatural event caught on video, before Dr. Jean-François Champollion VI, played by Jed Himmel, sets our expectations high as he describes a story of two men who may have forever changed the world in ways we can't even imagine. The footage in turn follows two paranormal investigators, played by Matthew Vaughn and Hal Maynor, on a ridiculous wild goose chase, spurred on by a lunatic on the phone talking about men on the moon secretly ruling the world for millennia. But things take a drastic turn when the men find themselves in possession of a jewel that should only be found on the moon, pursued by unknown agencies, and hunting clues about historical figures, UFO sightings, alternate histories, the Mayan calendar, men in black, religious sects, fringe science, shadow governments, Atlantis, and the mythological lunar city of Lunopolis. If you can't tell by my description, this movie is an ode to conspiracy nuts everywhere, taking the most ridiculous ideas put forth by the paranoid and deluded, and presenting them with an absolute certainty and attention to detail that is a joy to behold. Because even though it feels like poorly researched science fiction from beginning to end, this movie makes it feel real in how it's presented. I could chalk that up to the very good actors that make up the main cast, but there's more to it than that. For example, Vaughn and Maynor's job as characters is to debunk various supernatural proof on behalf of more public personas. The job they're on is a commission from a nighttime radio host who received a phone call that sounded a lot like a kook, but also received an album of peculiar photographs he has Vaughn and Major look into. It's a far more humble premise than the usual passionate believer downtrodden by skeptics until their conviction is rewarded. They're just two guys doing a job and not really expecting anything of it, and they don't suddenly become larger-than-life personas when things take a turn for the fantastic. They just want to find out why they're being threatened and possibly how to get out of it. And speaking of fantastic, the film is fairly grounded in that regard as well. With implications for the truth surrounding the human race this epic in scale, any other movie would attempt to make a big spectacle out of it, but not this one. Here you will find no gigantic spaceships or nuclear blasts of annihilation or the Earth torn asunder under cosmic forces, no. The sense of scale to the conspiracy they uncover is all down to how convincingly the characters talk about it, how compelling the story is, and how, should an organization as large as the film suggests exist, convincing the response to their revelation is. It really is like being inside a spy novel on occasion, sometimes with all the cheese and sometimes with all of the Ian Fleming. Further on, there is a sense of timelessness to this world that this all takes place in, which is incredibly well crafted. A lot of the time I was unsure when this is all supposed to have happened, because even though it's set in 2012, the movie feels like it was shot somewhere between the early 70s and late 90s, with nothing too specific to nail it to any certain time period. And this sense of otherworldliness is most definitely intentional, as it relates to how eventually it is all resolved. I'm not exaggerating when I say this is probably the most convincing portrayal of reality I have come across in any found footage movie ever. But even the sun has its spots, let's not forget. At times the film makes leaps in logic that a kid would pick up on, for example the Polaroids. For reasons unexplained, if history is changed, hard copy photographs remain unaffected, and so a reference picture can be taken to record a historical event. And if history is changed, the photograph will show what came before. I don't need to explain how little sense that makes, but to the film's credit, they acknowledge they don't know how that works. They just know it works, and so they take advantage of it. Further on, the cinematography and editing feels incredibly real in how rough it is. Visually, the film reminds me a lot of old conspiracy theory documentaries like Alien Autopsy, with dated graphics, dozens of interviews and stock footage and so on assembled into a compelling narrative that makes you believe in the impossible. And this is a double-edged sword. It certainly helps the movie feel more real, but it's also supposed to have been assembled by an amateur who wasn't sure of what he was doing, and it feels like it, especially in the audio balancing. There were many times when the added sound effects and background music drowned out the dialogue of what are very important scenes. But all in all, Lunopolis is a fantastic film. I loved every second of it for how clever it was. It was a sci-fi mystery with elements of a spy thriller that kept me intrigued until the end. A twist ending which is actually really good. But it's also very grounded, and it's not until watching it again I realized just how well crafted it is. That could be a positive or a negative, but just for its presentation, attention to detail, and just how spot on the writer and director got the feeling of it potentially being real. This is by far away the most impressive found footage movie I have ever seen. And I sentence it to a 10 on a scale of 11.